What I really want to do today is to talk to you about gender relations and gender issues in Islam in a way that will connect those issues to the larger perspective of what society is in the Islamic worldview, and also show how that relates to the general philosophical worldview, spiritual perspective of Islam. Because if you're going to understand gender relations in Islam, and you're going to understand it correctly, and you're going to understand why 500 million Muslim women are very passionately devoted to a religion that supposedly everyone thinks is, by nature oppressive to women, you have to understand it in the context of this larger view. The first thing to start with is to talk about gender in the context of the divine reality from the point of view of Islam. God in Islam, as in the Judeo-Christian tradition, is usually referred to by the masculine pronoun he as a matter of linguistic convention. Calling God it does not really seem appropriate in the monotheistic traditions especially. So, but it is clear in the Quran, as it is also in Jewish and Christian theology, that God is not male. It says very clearly in the Quran, God creates male and female, as it does in Genesis. Therefore, male and female, masculine and feminine, are created categories. They belong to the order of creation. God is not created. He is uncreated. God transcends gender. And in fact, masculine and feminine, or male and female, is just one example of the profound and irreducible duality that the Quran assigns to the created world. It says in the Quran, we created all things in pairs. Not only is there masculine and feminine in the order of humanity, in the animal order, among holly trees, is it? Also a male and female. But also, this is a world of pairs and complements, of opposites, light and dark, good and evil, earth and sky. And everything, in a sense, is dual from that perspective in the created order in Islam. Only God is one. Only the divine itself is one. Everything else is dual, and that duality is not resolved on earth itself. But because God is the creator of everything, he is the source of everything, and therefore masculinity and femininity also must have their origins and their roots in divine nature itself. Both masculine and feminine characteristics, masculine and feminine tendencies, to whatever extent we can talk about those things, originate in the divine reality. They originate from God himself. And in fact, it's significant, I think Hamza Yusuf mentioned this in his lecture, it's significant that in Islam you can never refer to God as Father. You would never do that. And in Jewish and Christian religious feminism, Jewish and Christian feminist writers have had a real struggle with this idea that God is associated with this name Father, which is also, of course, a specifically male figure on earth. That is not the case in Islam. You can never refer to God as Father. And in the names that are given to God, and again, Hamza Yusuf spoke about this a little bit last time in his section on the first pillar of belief, which was God, that the various names and qualities that are assigned to God are names and qualities that can have what would be a stereotypical or a traditional masculine and feminine basis. God is judge. He is the keeper of accounts. He is the giver of life and death. He's the majestic, the transcendent. But he is also the gentle. He is also the caring, the loving, the merciful. And these two names that are the most common names of God after the name Allah itself. Ar Rahman and Ar Raheem, again, as he pointed out, are related to the word Raham, which means womb. Now, if we move beyond the nature of God himself, and we look at the creation of human beings and the origin of human beings, one of the interesting things that we see, and I think this is the very first Quranic quote that I have on your sheet. At the very beginning of the chapter of the Quran, Al-Nisah, which is the chapter on women, it begins, "O mankind, heed your Lord who created you of a single soul, and from it created its mate, and from the two scattered abroad men and women." The one other thing in the Quran that is described very emphatically with oneness is this soul from which all human beings are created. It is a single soul. Nafsin wahidatan. That soul is then divided, and from it we created its mate, and from the two scattered about men and women. Now, I want you to just think about this for a minute, and I wanted to talk about the story in the Quran about the creation of man, the creation of Adam. The story is told in the Quran of God's creating Adam with his two hands, similar to Genesis. The wife of Adam, who is not given a name but is referred to as the wife of Adam, also is in the Quran. But the Quran does not include an account of her creation. In Genesis, as you probably all know, Eve is created from the rib of Adam to be his helpmate. This story is not found in the Quran. The Quran does not say anything specific about the creation of Eve. Now, because Muslims did incorporate additional material about the prophets in their hadith literature, which again I think you've been spoken to about, the story of the creation of Eve from Adam's rib is found in the hadith literature. And as you'll see, if you look on the back of the handout, I also have, it's not just women in the Quran, I think the last page is women in the hadith, and there's a very well-known hadith about women that's based on the concept of her being created from the rib of Adam. So it is there in the hadith. But it is significant that there is no Quranic basis for the idea of a secondary or derivative creation of Eve specifically. If we go back to this verse that I cited just now, 4:1, you will find, if you look, copies, translations of the Quran, maybe some of you even, I'm not sure which translations you have, that will read like this: "O mankind, heed your Lord who created you from a single soul," brackets, Adam, "and from it created its mate," bracket, Eve. But of course that's not in the Quran, and it's important to remember that. That is not in the Quranic text itself. And interestingly enough, the word for soul in Arabic, the single soul from which everything is created, is a grammatically feminine word. The word for mate that occurs here, zawj, is a grammatically masculine word. And it's not that it's not saying, certainly, that this soul is female and the male is then created from it. I think the point that is made here is that you have one soul from which all of humanity originates. This soul is divided into two parts, masculine and feminine. And from those two, men and women are scattered abroad. Now, if we look a little bit, and I know we're supposed to do this afternoon, but if you look at the story not only of the creation of Adam, but then at the story of the fall of Adam and Eve, the temptation and the fall of Adam and Eve, that story is found in the Quran as it is found in Genesis, but it is a different account in some significant ways. In the account that is found in the Quran, Adam and Eve are tempted together. It's not in the Genesis account, or similar to the Genesis account, where the serpent tempts Eve, and Eve then in turn tempts Adam with the apple. And in the Genesis account, this takes place when they both realize their shame and their nakedness, and they hide from God, and God goes to find them. God asks Adam, about this. And Adam says, "She made me do it." And so God turns to Eve, and Eve says, "The serpent made me do it." So there's a lot of passing the buck here. In the Quranic account, Adam and Eve are tempted together. They disobey together. They recognize their error together. And they immediately repent together. And so it is a very different kind of account from that perspective. Again, there's been a lot of work, certainly done by female Jewish and Christian scholars analyzing this story from the Genesis point of view. And this has been something that's been a problem in the understanding of women in those traditions, in the sense that women are viewed as both easily seduced and seducing. She's a sort of middle of those two things. In the Quranic account, that never comes up. That isn't an issue.